Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shelly Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy. This is episode number 196, Mandatory Pleasure for Men. Okay, welcome to this episode where we are going to really take a closer look at mandatory pleasure. What? Is this a good thing, a bad thing? Does it even matter if it's good or bad? So often when I get couples that want to work with me and they are struggling with intimacy, I will ask them to rate their pleasure, their level of pleasure on a scale of 1 to 10. What usually happens is that a husband will rate his pleasure pretty high, like a 9 or a 10. And he probably knows that there are things that could be improved, but the actual sexual pleasure that comes from having an orgasm, that's there for them. So those numbers are pretty high. Now, for the women, it's the exact opposite. They are usually rating their pleasure in the experience more along the lines of like a 1 or a 2. And then usually what they do is they will say something like, well, every now and then it's maybe a 6. But for the most part, it is low numbers and that they are not consistently feeling pleasure during their sexual experience with their husband. So it's really interesting because this creates a problem for us that needs to be addressed. And a lot of times we understand that this problem exists, but we may not really actually have the true understanding of why it exists or what we can do about it. And so what this ends up leaving us with is that both spouses are involved in the same activity, right? This reproductive process of having sex. And we are having 2 very different experiences, right? Same activity, totally different experiences. So we're having one, the husband is having pleasure, but the wife is not. And so usually for the husband, they're always like, what? It's like, I just thought my wife didn't quite enjoy it as much as me. And I thought that was kind of typical for, women. Maybe they don't enjoy it or seek it out as much as men, but they are usually floored when they find out, like, no, there's like hardly any pleasure, like really hardly any. And sometimes it's even the opposite. Sometimes it's painful. And they're like, what? How can this be? How is this even possible? And it comes down to this. For men, sex is pleasurable. That is a fact. Those 2 things happen together. It's mandatory. They're in conjunction. But this is not a fact for women. Pleasure is not mandatory for women when they're having sex. It's not mandatory. It's not included as part of the process, right? Because where the husband has all of his pleasurable nerves are in the penis. And for the woman, when the penis is entering the vagina, that is not where all of her pleasurable nerves are. It's not in that vaginal canal. There might be a few, but very little, because that's where we birth babies. That's painful. So we don't have a high number of nerve endings inside there, right? That means all of the female pleasurable nerve endings reside somewhere else in a different location in the body. And so in just the mechanics of the procreative process, if we don't include the clitoris, the home of pleasure for women, then there is little to no pleasure for women. So we really have to take this into account. And it's interesting because during the reproductive process, right, during sex, there can be success, right? There can be success with meaning that the man could release the semen and the sperm and it can be deposited into the vagina. That can happen successfully, but even that success does not mean that the woman had pleasure at all in the process. But when the man releases that semen and that sperm, that is pleasurable. So his success is pleasurable. Those two things are tied together for men, but it is not tied together for women. So in order to create a baby in the reproductive process, a man is required. He is required to have pleasure. It's mandatory. He's required to have it. There's no semen being deposited into the woman's vagina without him experiencing pleasure. But this is, again, not the case for the wife. Now, isn't this crazy? This is crazy, right? I think we probably know this, but we take this for granted. We don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I had a client recently, the husband, and he was telling me he didn't even know what the clitoris was. Neither did his wife for about 15 years into their marriage. So I was like, okay, so for 15 years, the wife has had zero pleasure, right? Zero. So we need to really make sure we are being mature, we're being adults, and we are taking a look at this situation in reality for what it is, truly. Now, the other interesting thing is that women are actually built to have more pleasure than her husband. What? So why are we having less? Why are we having less? If we're built for more, why are we having less? If we look at the numbers of nerve endings, right? The penis has 4,000 nerve endings. The vaginal canal, hardly any. The clitoris has 12,000 nerve endings in it. Yeah. Yeah. Women are built for more pleasure, but we are having far less. So we're going to need to address this. This is probably why so many women, so many wives aren't craving sex, right? Because we're not including her pleasure points, right? A lot of times they're ignored. They're not included at all. And so if we are interested, if a husband is interested or wishing like, hey, I wish my wife could really enjoy sex as much as me. I wish she desired it as much as me. Well, we've got to be operating on a more effective system than just the procreative one, right? Because that one is a little bit, it excludes her pleasure. It's not embedded in the system. So we're having mismatched experiences, especially the wife. She knows, and her body knows that there is a lot more pleasure to be had that's not taking place. So this creates some frustration for her. We usually talk about men being sexually frustrated, but women are sexually frustrated. We just don't talk about it as much. We don't express it the same way. We don't have this like build up, we don't have the blue balls terminology. But we're having an incongruent experience. We know when the buildup starts to take place and then we're not having pleasure or we're not experiencing an orgasm, we know that we are not tapping into what's possible. So it's disappointing. We're like, well, it could be there. I know what could have happened, but it's not happening. And so that also creates some frustration for her. So her pleasure in the reproductive process alone is deemed unnecessary. For the reproductive process to be successful, a woman's pleasure is unnecessary. So we have to really address this. We have to really start to say, okay, well, let's make an adjustment. The adjustment has to be in reality, not fantasy. We can't just say, well, I wish my wife was just different. I wish she had way more testosterone than me, because then life would be easy and we're going to have this crazy, sexy, amazing life where we just want each other all the time. Okay, that is very much a fantasy, right? But we can drastically improve things if we start in reality. So let's do that. Right? Because this is not like it's unsolvable. It's very solvable. There's a solution to this. And do you know what the solution is? The solution is that we need to use a system. We need to use something that is effective, that is inclusive of female pleasure, not to the point where we are saying men's pleasure doesn't matter. It's already going to be there. But we now need to include female pleasure. We need an all-inclusive system. Now, of course, this is my wheelhouse. This is what I love. This inclusive system is called the intimacy track. It has steps. And these steps are there so that the female pleasure is included. So if you don't know what those steps are of the intimacy track, I really suggest you get on my website, shelley.andersoncoaching.com, and sign up for a free discovery session with me, right? Let's talk about this. You need to know what the intimacy track is. You need to know the steps and what's included so that your wife can have all the pleasure that is available to her. Now, that's a fun thing to get involved in. So let's just take a moment and talk about this reproductive process, right? This is intercourse. We all know what intercourse is, but what is the definition, right? I love definitions. Intercourse can be defined as the doings between individuals, right? Yes, we are doing something. And it can also be defined as sexual union involving penetration of the vagina by the penis. So I really do think some of these words are very intriguing and inviting. Like there's a union here, a union. If the husband is the only one having pleasure, is that uniting? Is there a union there? It's not going to feel like that for the wife. She's not going to feel like that's a union. And I also like this word penetration. We're going to come back to that definition in a second. But let's look at the two root words of intercourse, right? We have inter, which is to place, right? We're to place something inside of something else, to deposit, to put in the midst, like in between, something that is located inside or within, and something that is reciprocal. Now, I love these definitions, right? And if we're thinking about coming together as husband and wife and to be united in a sexual way, it would be very valuable and beneficial to say, hey, let's look at what's going on inside of my wife. What's deep? What's located deep within her? Do we know what this means? I'm not just talking about in the body. That's part of it, but it's not the only part. We are talking about what is in her mind and what is in her heart. This means her thoughts and her feelings. Yes. Yes. This is core for intercourse to be pleasurable. Now, the other part of the word intercourse is course. We know what a course is. I have a course all about intimacy. But if we look at the definitions, a course is defined as the path over which something moves or extends. It's the action of moving in a path. It's the accustomed procedure or normal action of things. It's a chosen manner of conducting oneself. It's progression. This means progress, not staying in the exact same place forever. Do not stay stuck. Do not stay the same. Progress. Progression through a development or series of acts and events. This is one of my favorite words, development, right? Husbands, there's something for you to develop as you consider sex. There is more to develop. There's more to discover and learn when it comes to intercourse. And for the women, there is so much to develop about how you operate, your thoughts and your feelings being at the core of your sexual experience, and therefore your pleasurable experience. But there is a development that needs to take place. And so if we've never spent time learning about how our thoughts have an impact on our sexual experience, that's where we need to do some work. A course is also defined as an ordered process or succession. It's also defined as a layer, which I thought was really cool. And for the fun part, it's defined as a part of a meal served at one time. And of course, I love that. I love mini courses and lots of them. I love the variety, right? And so being able to have these definitions can really be of value to us. And this concept from the root part of of being reciprocal, that's what we need. We need reciprocal pleasure. We need both spouses to be experiencing pleasure. That feels uniting. That feels like a union, not just my husband gets all the pleasure and I just have to white knuckle it. I have to grin and bear it and get through it. That's not very inviting. And that's not really what draws a woman to want more sex, to have a desire for it, or to even crave it, right? Just trying to get through it. Now, what about this word penetration, right? To penetrate. What does that mean? To penetrate means to enter by overcoming resistance. Okay, husbands, let's be real. Do you think your wife is resistant to sex? Yes. You know the answer is yes. Women, do you feel resistant to sex? Yes. You know, I know from working with all the women and their husbands that we feel this. We feel this resistance to sex. And of course we do. We're not having pleasure from it. Okay. So as we think about this word penetrating, we have to actually overcome the resistance. And the only way we can do that is to start paying attention to the thoughts that are taking place here and the feelings that come with it. This is why coaching is so valuable. This is why thought work is necessary, right? Is to be able to address those things, to overcome them. And if we do overcome those negative thoughts about sex, about our spouse, about ourselves, what happens to the resistance? It goes down. And we will know how to really lower our resistance or eliminate it. And we'll have the skill to be able to do that on command whenever we want. To penetrate means to gain entrance to something. It means to discover the inner contents. Again, it's related, right? The inner contents of our mind, our heart. And It's to discover the meaning of something. This is a mic drop moment right here, right? Because women, in order for them to have pleasure in their sexual experience, they have to have a meaning connected to it. And not just any meaning, right? Because they do it for meanings. They have meanings that are negative, and that's why it sucks. Sex sucks when their meanings are negative, right? Like, I got to do it. It's my duty. I want to be a good wife. I got to meet my husband's needs. Those are all meanings, but they don't like those meanings. Those meanings suck for them. And so when you have a meaning that you don't like, sex is going to suck. So meaningfulness is so vital. Women have to find their own meaningful reasons to be having sex with their spouse. And the last definition for the word penetrate is to affect profoundly with feeling or with the senses. What? Now, this is such a great invitation. Women, have you involved and included your senses, all of your senses in the sexual experience? Have you set up the room in such a way that your senses will be invited to show up and participate? And for the husbands, same thing. Where are you having sex the most? Is it the main bedroom? Light some candles, right? For the visual, put some music on so that we are inviting the sense of hearing to be involved, right? Get some massage oil going, right? And use the sense of touch and invite touch to be a part of the experience. Use the senses. But I love that penetration involves the concept of having a profound effect. Husbands, you can have a profound effect on your wife. Start paying attention and being curious about her thoughts, about her feelings. If you listen to my podcast that was called Less Rhetoric, More Sex, you'll probably start to get a feeling for how valuable this is. Stop trying to skip that stuff and just call it fluff as if it is irrelevant. It is so relevant and it is so profound. Feelings are profound for women's pleasure. Her thoughts are profound for her pleasure. Yes, these are very profound. So husbands, as you start paying more attention to your wife's thoughts about things and her feelings about things, and you start having those discussions, you revel in the talk, you revel in the discussions, you revel and bathe and immerse yourself in the rhetoric. Yeah, you could have a profound effect on your wife and her pleasure. Why would you ever resist that? If you want to do some penetrating, you have got to start doing things that are profound. Yes. And your wife is going to really, really enjoy that. And she's going to appreciate that. We've got to penetrate the mind of the woman. And we have got to penetrate the heart of the woman. This is sexy stuff. We should not be dismissing any of this, right? Let's embrace it. This is sexy stuff. Now, when I work with couples, I often use something that I call pleasure points, and we talk about, okay, the reproductive path. Let's look at all the things that are involved in that. And we end up giving things points. And the husbands come out 12 out of 12. And the wives do not. They come out 2 out of 12. So we have this huge gap. We have this huge gap of what's involved. And then when we talk about it and we talk about pleasure and the success that comes from the procreative process, I want to give you a few words. When men are having sex, their pleasure in the process is embedded. It's attached, right? Success is attached to pleasure. Their pleasure is compulsory. It's mandatory. It's enforced. It's compelled. It's necessary, and it's required, right? There's no getting out of pleasure for men. It's impossible. But for women, it's the opposite, right? Pleasure in the process of procreation is detached. It's separate. It's not embedded. That means it's optional. It's voluntary. It's elective. It's unnecessary. It's not required, which means it's an accessory. No, this is a very sad reality. But it is reality. And so if we know it and address it, then we can do something about it. I thought the word voluntary was very interesting, right? Because if we think about something and we're like, I want to volunteer for that. I'm going to be a volunteer. I'm going to sign up for that, right? You got to put some effort into that. That's very different if a woman has to volunteer and sign up for pleasure. But the husband can volunteer to help out with that too by learning the more effective system, right? The intimacy track. We do not want to continue on with these huge deficits and these huge gaps. We need to start using a system that actually provides pleasure for the wife. It provides it, right? It puts it in, it includes it. This is what we want. This is going to be a more fun experience. So this will include, if we use a more inclusive system that provides pleasure for the women in the intimacy track, this will include what her prerequisites for pleasure are. Yes, this is what we want. This will create the reciprocal experience that also creates union. This is when breakthroughs happen for pleasure. Yes. This is when the resistance for sex goes down, is when we use all the prerequisites that are involved in the intimacy track. Pleasure prerequisites for women are at the heart of the intimacy track. So that's why if you don't know it, it's vital that you learn it. And this is when she can start to actually enjoy sex and feel the pleasure and want more. That's when she starts to say, yes, I volunteer to have sex with my husband. I want to sign up for more of that. Right? Let's get to that point because we're not there right now, but we can get there. Now, if you find that this is resonating with you and you're like, yes, I would really love this to take place between me and my spouse, please get on my website, shelley.andersoncoaching.com, and sign up for a free discovery session with me. Let's talk through it. You need a coach approach to pleasure, sex, and intimacy. This is not therapy. This is a coach approach. And you can get a free session with me if you sign up. So, husbands, do this for yourself. Sign up for a free session. Learn. Decide to embark on this awesome adventure. Get on the right path, the right course, an all-inclusive one. And learn this intimacy trick. And for the women, do this for yourself. Stop settling for sex that sucks. Tap into all the pleasure that is possible and available to you. You are worth it. So get on it and do it this week, because remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy with yourself, the more you restore it with your spouse. Thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you will join me again next week.